Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. How was lunch? Smiling faces. Oh, some feedback. That's always nice. So we're continuing on with our keynote track today with some amazing thought leaders and pioneers in the space. Up next, we have Christopher Stapleton, who's a creative venture catalyst with Simiosys Real-World Laboratory. He serves as creative director, producer, and pioneer of experiential design innovations for immersive simulation technologies with work that spans across commercial, civic, and academic sectors. He also serves as a creative executive and consultant for premier entertainment, education, and marketing institutions such as Disney Imagineering, Universal Studios, MGM, and the Museum of Science. Christopher will be talking about an emerging innovation in aphasia therapy called story troves in a session entitled Unlocking Pathways in the Brain to Escape the Prison of the Mind. Please join me in welcoming Christopher to the stage.
I bet I had more people if I was serving food. Hi, you can all see me, I'm sure. How many of you know what aphasia is? Raise your hand. Not many. That's usually the case. Most people who get aphasia don't know what aphasia means, which is pretty troubling because there's millions of Americans that have aphasia, and they didn't know it when they got it. And any one of you could get aphasia at any time, anywhere. It's kind of scary, and you don't know what it is. So aphasia is a loss of language due to a stroke or head trauma. It's a brain injury that scrambles up the language processing of the brain. And it's very challenging. And when people suffer from aphasia, they get locked in their minds because it's a loss of language, but not of intelligence. So we've had clients that are pilots, surgeons, lawyers, detectives. That's just one client. Then we have other clients that are, a lifetime of experience, of knowledge, and it's locked in, they can't communicate it. And do you realize that speech is the number one prejudice in the civilized world? It's over gender, over race, over culture. The way you speak, people will prejudge you more. And it's a really troubling thing because you get isolated, you get depressed, your health goes down, the family health goes down. It multiplies that millions of aphasias with other troubles. And it's a challenge because how do you do it? Traditional therapy is a very analytical, scientific approach to aphasia, which is you lost language, we'll teach you language. You will relearn language. There's a problem with that. That's really focusing on the disabilities, not the abilities. It's like you lost your legs, we're going to make you try to walk. Wait a minute. And it's a prerequisite that you relearn the language in order to participate with life. Because that's what they want to do, is because they lost their old life. They have to create a new life with their new state. And so that's what we looked at. We looked at a more analogical way of looking at aphasia therapy because it's language, it's creative, it's expressive, it's joyful. That's what we should be using as our therapy. And in otherwise, what was it before was like a clinic environment working with preschool activities for people my age. They know the language, they've just lost connection with it. And so it's that rediscovery what's important. So we've decided, my background's theme parks. I've done mega theme parks. But what I do with therapy is make a little story world, working with a theme park environment, which is kind of story. Because in theme parks, we have to make stories in language so that language isn't the barrier because we work with international audiences. So the visual, everything, every other aspect of communication. And then we put it in with the mixed reality activities that have this spectrum of real, virtual, and imagined activities, which really opens this pathway, this river of communication we can look at. So the language is just one aspect of communication. So imagine it like a river. That's one of the thrill rides I designed. But think of communication as a huge river, and words are only one pathway. Aphasia is a boulder that stops the use of words, but you have all this other communication. What if people with aphasia taught me is that they're not just disabled, we're disabled. Because what happens is that we rely so much on words and so much on language that we disabilitate ourselves by not using that broader river of communication. And what's happening here is that we really need to look at both how do we look at aphasia therapy and how do we look at our own world. This is where we started with mixed reality.
When you're robbed of your ability to communicate, you're robbed of the essence of who you are. Aphasia is a loss of language due to some type of a brain injury, usually stroke, but it can be disease, it can be trauma, it can be a tumor. Story is so critical to what we do as a speech-language pathologist. And I think when we take story out of what we do, all it is drill and practice. And in the midst of that, like you said, if the therapist is in there with you, I can be feeding you some language to augment, to help you.
Right.
But you're telling the story. It's your story.
Right.
I don't believe virtual reality can do that because I believe the element of relationship isn't there. And I believe that for the person with aphasia, that interconnection with another human being is extremely important for them.
It's really cool.
It is
It's
cool.
really
isn't
cool
it?
to see because you can see behind you there's really cool stuff back there.
What is behind there? What are you seeing?
I see you, and I see where a lot of the trees and snapgrass
Okay.
right there, and a couple. Here's a big one, a really nice big one.
But think how much more enriching it is if it's connected to a story, and particularly your story, what you want to be talking about. Then those 20 words are your words, and it's telling your story.
So what happened here in this mixed reality world, this is what we call a prototype, we just kind of explored and played around with it, is that the language started to flow. Why was that? Traditional therapy was a drill and practice of words. So the prerequisite to telling a story, first learn the language. And it's like, oh man. In actuality, we start with the story. The story we can say in so many different ways, and that's one of the breakthroughs. So the mixed reality, that version that you saw there, was a year ago, and that wasn't the solution. That was the solution to find the solution. And what we discovered is when you're immersed into a story world, language and story starts to flow, and when you have that equal partnering with that other person telling that story, it helps. That push and pull of conversation is a powerful thing for communication and language. And the drill and practice was the therapist over the client saying, learn these words, like a school teacher, and that was not producing the results. So you have this, and story has to do so many different areas. So think about what your life would be without story. What would it mean to lose language? You lose expression, connection, self-value, understanding, sense of belonging, global connection, and this personal empowerment. That's what was happening to these clients. But in reality, all these things exist before words were ever invented. So why is it so troubling now? Is that we were depending on words too much. And language is a technology. It's an ancient disruptive technology, but now it's taken away. It's like if the internet was taken away from you right now, you would be disabled on the most part. But it doesn't change who you are. It doesn't erase your memories. It doesn't do all that stuff. And this is where aphasias are. They're trapped in the mind. They can't communicate, yet they're the same person. But they have to change the story from the back, what they were and what they could do, in a moment's notice having a stroke, and we need to change that story and what they can do, and working on their abilities versus the disabilities. So we wanted to look into the power of the story that it was happening in the mixed reality world, and the goggles were kind of not able to kind of reach 1 million people. So we needed a better solution. So imagine, I want to do an experiment with you. Imagine a story that has to do with either fire or water. Can you all imagine a story with fire and water? How do you see that story? Do you see it in words? How do you see that story? Well, you see it in pictures. And when we imagine pictures, we communicate, we translate it into words, and then we have to translate those words back into a story. But that story may not be the same as you imagine it. There's two translations of words there. What we really want to do is be able to share our imagination. What we want to do is translate what I'm imagining with what you're imagining, but better yet, have a conversational story that is creating a story together. And this was the power of communication versus teaching language. And it's through the stories that we were able to rediscover words and rediscover language that was so powerful and what's joyful and liberating in the process of therapy, which is incredible. So we went to objects. We found that the power of objects themselves, we brought something, a relic in that means something. This was a trophy that a aphasia patient, client won, and it was a very sad thing because they couldn't compete anymore. The good thing is after some therapy, she was able to compete again. But the issue is, by telling the story of this relic, was so powerful and easy for her to tell that story and to communicate, but it wasn't communicating in words, it was painting a picture in our imagination. It's amazing how people can paint an idea and a picture in your imagination without words. So we have to understand that stories became before words. We're hardwired for story. That's where we need to start. So we created a thing called a story troves where we author a box of objects. And what's interesting about this, in the process, we use kind of the perspective of a historian, anthropologist, treasure hunter, detective reporter, people who use objects and read objects. And it was powerful in how they painted with the imagination. So the box of the authored boxes, the box itself was like, setting up the expectation, opening up a present, the objects sparking your curiosity, the pictures prompting questions and digging into it, and the words were just connecting. They weren't the obstacles. You could do the whole thing without the words, but the words gave added value. It gave you a challenge. And so it's changing the nature of therapy, and we wanted to look at it as an entertainment form and as a learning form, not just a therapy form, because it was working so well. There's some video of some 20-something groups playing it as an entertainment form, and you can see how they go after this. We present it and say, okay, this is the box we found. We know hardly any instructions. It's just, what's the story? We don't know. And they dug in. They were like opening a Christmas present. They're curious. They go into it. The historians that did it opened it very carefully. I mean, they would love to have gloves and a magnifying glass, and they went through it very delicately. Everyone does it in a different way, which is interesting. As we dig through the boxes, there's layers that reveal itself like a scene or like a next act. In the discover stage, you have other people starting to piece it together, and it's what we don't do that lets their imagination fill in. They are not the authors, but they're participating in the authorship. This box can have 1 million stories in it by the same objects. It's what they draw. But it's authored to provoke an imagination and provoke a story. And what's interesting here is that people with aphasia were talking very naturally and not strained and not pressured. That we learned how caregivers could help them, know when to help, when not to help, but it became an overall joyful experience. And then we did it in the History Center. And what's interesting is that we had no time limit, but each group, no matter what age, spent around 50 minutes on this, one box, and was enthralled all throughout there, which is amazing. And we didn't believe it, and there's no wrong answer here, which is so relief from the preschool K-12 like. All answers are creative and all right and all joyful. And so what we're doing right now is when we're real mixed and we came back to full real, what we're now doing is working with the history department, attaching their artifact database, the digital humanities with these boxes, and creating the Internet of Things. And so now what this does is a solution for therapy. It works for teaching history. The history centers that are losing attendance are going to gain attendance because now it's also an aphasia therapy activity for a lifetime. And so it's connecting. It's also looking at ways to teach language. So this one solution is blossoming into all these different applications, and these different sectors that were once separated are helping each other move along. And what's interesting and what's important is that mixed reality is a palette. What part do I want you to use real? What part do I want to do virtual? What do I want to have them imagine? It's not one or the other. It's not a set percentage or a gauge. It's a palette that we paint with. And we paint with the overall imagination. And we paint with story. And it tells us, why should we care and strike the heart. The hands say, what should I do? And give the hands something. Communication with hands and touch is so important. We had pieces of burnt things because it was about a pub being burnt down. Smelling it, it's just all of it, all senses, all dimensions, all directions in a simple box gave it so much power and reality. And they were so immersed in the story, just as a story for them. And then the game and instruction. So with these, before the therapy, we had an instructional experiential learning theory that we have called interplay, where we use story, playing, game as strategies to deal with grounded theories and experiential learning. And it's really complicated how the brain works, but as complicated and deep and thick this is, it's very intuitive. In fact, they go through these processes naturally. We don't have to give instructions to a lot of different aspects of ways we do that. And so it's doing a great deal of help for these clients. And we're just kind of capturing, right now we're doing the evidence-based data to really kind of understand we did something amazing, but we don't know why it's doing it. And so right now we're going through the IRBs and clinical to really now go into all the therapy, understand what's happening. We're going through with the NEH grant to really kind of look at the learning. It's a powerful tool, just a box of stuff. And then that can be augmented to any level of virtuality as we want to. But the most thing is not how much we could teach aphasia, it's how much aphasia taught us. And the lessons learned, and it's the lessons we can learn about technology. It's not the function of language or the technology, but it's about the purpose of the communication and the creativity and the human creativity. And this is what lessons we can learn about mixed and augmented reality. Together we're better. We need to slow down. We need to listen to each other and build off of each other and work with this transdisciplinary collaboration. The therapist was going through paradigm shifts every month. I was going through paradigm shifts every month because it brought new knowledge and new perspective into things that we were doing all our lives and doing something as simple and as basic as story. Focus on the abilities versus the disabilities, the possibilities versus the capabilities. We so much want to kind of help human beings, fill in problems. And in reality, it's just empowering people that we should look at that technology. Losing capabilities shouldn't be about losing identity. Technology as a language should augment us, not limit us. And avoid the inventor's paradox, which is a meaning of do I go real big and solve everything? Do I solve one thing and solve just one thing? Let the user tell you what they need. Think analogically and not as much analytically on finding the solution. And that's where the audience will tell you what they need. But most important, look at innovation as liberating, not as disruptive. And that is the power of innovation, and the power of the innovation process is what is it that's going to liberate you. And this is what we've been able to do to be able to find pathways through the mind to be able to reconnect aphasia clients with and participating in life in community centers for a lifetime. And it's very exciting, and you'll hear more about it. And any questions?
Christopher. So we have time for one question. Do we have mic runner here? Great. Question? Wave your hand. Hear some noises. Okay, I think we're good.
Come on, Tom, one question.
Mic in the front here.
So, once you have your aphasia patients who are now discovering a new form of communicating, what's the next step after that? Where do they go after that?
They're different than what they are before. But by participating in life now, they can redefine who they are and define their new story. They weren't able to find a new story without participating in life. And that's the exciting part. And we're going to probably build a group of aphasia clients to help us build these troves for all these history centers around to helping others. And so we're going to find a whole business based upon, having them fulfill their natural work. Because aphasia-ready workplace is a difficult thing. The key things to working with aphasia is you have to slow down, you have to listen, and there's no workplace that's willing to slow down for anybody. And so what we want to do is create an aphasia-friendly workplace with people with aphasia. And we're going to find out going slow and listening is probably going to get a better product. And they're going to find a new lease on life.
Great. Big round of applause for Christopher, everybody.
And my group. Oh, I want to thank Janet Whiteside and Dana Mott and Jennifer Vick, too. That slide went off, but those are my team that I'm working with. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much.